It's lovely to be here. It's a Friday afternoon at the LMS. Thank you so very much for coming along this afternoon. Before we get started properly, and I introduce our esteemed panel, just a few bits and pieces of housekeeping. Most of you who live here on a daily basis should know these already, but in case not, we'll just go back through them. It is a no smoking site. There's no smoking in any of the buildings or indeed anywhere on the Hammersmith Hospital campus site. We are not expecting a fire alarm, so if you hear something, we do have to skedaddle out of the building. In the event of a fire alarm, you must leave by the exits at either end of the building. Do not, under any circumstances, use the central stairway. It turns into a chimney for reasons which are actually about fire control. But if there is a fire, make sure that you use the fire stairs, not the central atrium stairs. We do have fire wardens on duty today, so they'll be wearing high vis. One of them's over there, Duncan, in the corner. So in the event of any emergency, find Duncan. If you're feeling unwell, do contact a member of staff. We can get first aider to you. We're hoping there are no infectious diseases in our midst, but we do have face masks available if anyone wants to put one on, if you do not feel safe without one. And finally, when you're leaving tonight, we are approximately equidistant between East Acton and White City stations on the Central Line, but we strongly recommend that you go the White City direction and not the East Acton direction. With the greatest respect to our friends who live in East Acton, it's not considered the safest place after dark. So White City is much better lit and the best way home. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to welcome our panel. Thank you so much for making time this afternoon. We have Ottoline Leyser, CEO of UKRI, John Iredale, Interim Chief Exec of the Medical Research Council, and Jonathon Weaver, who's the Dean of the Imperial Faculty of Medicine. So please welcome our guests. So some of you may be wondering, or perhaps why are we here? Some of you will already know that this is the culmination of a project that was the brainchild of Professor Dame Mandy Fisher, who has done a fantastic job in creating this project, Picture of Health, which involved a great deal of social and community engagement to begin with, to figure out what a picture of health meant to people across cross-sections of society. 100 of those contributions were put together into the book that you've seen outside, and the contributions that you've seen in our art exhibition. I would like to just thank Mandy for having the fantastic idea of doing this in celebration of our new building. So thank you very much. Of course, there has been a whole team of people been putting this together, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So we created this book. We're celebrating the opening of this quite fantastic new building. But I thought it might be interesting just to talk a little bit about the history of White City and how we got to where we are. So over the last couple of days, on Tuesday and Wednesday this week, we've had another few panels, and we've been discussing the role of science communication in getting our message out there. When we make discoveries, we have discoveries, how do we engage people with those discoveries and bring them the same kind of excitement and joy as we all share about science. We've also been talking about the role of art in communicating science, and that's everything from cartoons and graphic design to more highbrow art. But we had speakers including Michael Rosen and Paula Bush, who spoke very eloquently about the role that art played. Michael Rosen in particular talked about a time when he lost his own son to bacterial meningitis, and he lost the ability to write for quite some time. He couldn't write, he just found that he couldn't express himself. And he actually found an escape from that sort of prison of not being able to write in the poetry of someone else. So he very much credits other people's art with the fact that we have so much of an incredible body of work from him today. But just so we've talked a bit about art and science communication, but today I really want to think a bit more about us as the London Institute of Medical Sciences, MRC funded, here as part of Imperial College on the Hammersmith Hospital campus. How did we get here? Well, White City, some of you will know this, you may not all, got its name from the Anglo-French exhibition that happened at the beginning of the 20th century, which was on the White City site, which had before that been derelict. And all of the pavilions and the buildings that they made were painted white, hence White City became the name for it. It was some of the buildings were used on and off until about 1914, and then the whole area fell into disrepair until it was built upon first by the Territorial Army, then by the BBC, and then of course there was housing that was built there in the 1930s, and now White City has a very vibrant community, a residential community as well. The Hammersmith Hospital started out as a workhouse. It was a workhouse with an infirmary. It was bought for the land was bought for the massive sum of £14,000 at the end of the 19th century. And it was built, say, as a workhouse and an infirmary. If I could have the next slide, please. And there was a scandal. I mean, it's quite extensive, as you can see. You can see how we've got the massive site that we do now. There was quite a scandal because it was considered, the building cost £250,000. And it was considered quite scandalous that it was so very ornate and so very pretty when it was supposed to be catering for people who were destitute. So I wonder what they would make of the money that we've spent today building this brand new building that we're now in. So, John, I was wondering if the MRC have obviously played a massive part in this. If I could come to you first, can you talk to us a little bit about why you have invested this money here in the LMS and what your hopes are for what will happen here on this site?
Right. Yes. So let's put the LMS then in context. So MRC funds medical research on behalf of all of you, on behalf of the taxpayer, through the whole of the UK, and we have 3 major research institutes, and the research institutes offer the opportunity for the very best UK scientists to come together, to be nucleated, to spark off one another, to develop new ideas, new techniques, create new opportunities, and really drive forward science of relevance to human biology, and particularly with respect to the LMS, what I would call human pathobiology, the genesis of disease, and through that, an understanding of the way in which we might design new treatments. So these 3 institutes constitute the Laboratory for Molecular Biology, which is very much down at the molecular level, which is in Cambridge. The Crick Institute, which is the wonderful cathedral-like building that you see if you alight from Eurostar or you travel via Euston or King's Cross St Pancras behind the British Library, which again brings together scientists to prosecute this kind of activity. And then there is this site. And this site has an amazing history. We've heard about the Hammersmith Hospital. That developed through particularly the late 1950s, through the 60s and into the mid 80s as an unbelievably important engine, both of experimental work of direct benefits to human beings, including what we call experimental medicine, which is where you undertake direct measurements and interventions in human beings, actually as it were the research model, and try new treatments live, as it were, in human models, and established really literally a world-ranking reputation for this sort of activity. Not only that, but it also trained a whole generation, in fact, several generations of individuals who then migrated out of this part of West London and went across the UK and led hugely important departments of medicine. I mean, my career had huge benefit from I've spent a significant part of my time working in Scotland, in Edinburgh, and my immediate predecessor as chair of medicine there, and an individual, in fact, 2 individuals that really established the medical credentials latterly were 2 professors called Christopher Haslett and John Saville, both of whom spent their formative years here at what was then the Hammersmith Hospital. It's associated institute. This is turning quite long-winded, but I think the history is important.
It is.
So
Carry on.
what we're seeing now is the natural culmination of that and carrying on that tradition and bringing together the hugely important scientists that are right at the cutting edge of what they do, I think in a disease agnostic way, so that they're looking at the really key processes that will underpin multiple diseases and activities in human beings of relevance to disease in a state-of-the-art building. And do not underestimate the value of that. Not only is a great place to work and having the most up-to-date equipment, but it really acts as a magnet to bring in the best scientists from around the world. Believe me, it makes a huge difference. But there is also, has been over the last decade, a renewed interest in this institute also being a national asset and offering the opportunity for people to come and train here. Vivka Art's predecessor as director ran a very successful scheme to train young doctors and expose them to the laboratory interface. But that kind of opportunity has been really effectively recapitulated, and I believe in this building will now go from strength to strength. So it is one of MRC's 3 big institutes, and I think it's fantastic.
Excellent, thank you. Jonathon, coming a little bit closer to home to Imperial, but also you have a long history with this site. You were at the Royal Postgraduate Medical School, I believe, before it was the Faculty of Medicine. And I'm not quite clear on the history. Did one turn into the other, or was there an overlap?
Okay.
So
25 years ago, medicine in London was very balkanized. There were 12 independent medical schools, which were each quite tiny and sort of boutique. And they fought each other constantly for influence and power. And they infuriated the government because they were very influential, because it was a teaching hospital that looked after all the politicians and senior civil servants. And this was in Margaret Thatcher's time, and she just had enough of them. And so there was a report, Todd report, that said they need to merge, and they need to merge with the big universities in London. So the 3 undergraduate medical schools in West London, Westminster, St Mary's, Charing Cross, and the 2 postgraduate institutions, the one here, the Royal Postgraduate, PMI, Royal Postgraduate Medical Institute, and National Heart and Lung Institute, merged with Imperial College. So Imperial College then was a college of science and technology. It did a lot of mining research and oil and gas and physics. It never had medicine. And all of a sudden, on one day, all of medicine in West London descended on Imperial College. And that was 25 years ago. It's sort of taken 25 years for the university to understand medicine and medicine to understand the university. And what you're seeing here is really the culmination of 25 years. So 10 years ago, the college, which was entirely then based at South Kent, in this glorious space around the museums, just to the south of the Royal Albert Hall, Albertopolis, this realized that it really needed to embrace medicine more fully, needed to have more of the college activity adjacent to a clinical site, one of the hospital sites. And any further development around South Kent is impossible. You can't buy land there. So 10 years ago, the opportunity to buy 26 acres of White City came up when the BBC sort of altered its priorities and started selling off land. And so the White City site is 300 meters here to I think where I'm sitting here, that way, immediately to the east of us. And that was an opportunity for the college to buy that land and start to move large chunks of college research relevant to medicine to White City, to be alongside the MRC here in this building and alongside the hospital and the parts of the Faculty of Medicine. So engineering has moved there, and all of bioengineering, all of chemistry has moved there, all of data sciences have moved there. And we're using the opportunity to bring large chunks of academic medicine to this site too. So the college looks at Hammersmith and White City as a single campus. And what we've been able to do is attract industry around us. So life science industry, Novartis, one of the big pharma companies, loads of small spin-out companies working in life sciences, are starting to grow a sort of ecosystem around here, where you've got a big hospital, a specialist hospital. This is an elective hospital. There's no accident and emergency here. This is where we do all the specialized surgery and specialized medicine for the whole of West London, population of about 2.5 million, focusing on here. And adjacent to the sort of scientific, basic science power of Imperial. And this LMS, the jewel in the crown, is this sort of fascinating interface between discovery science and the opportunity to start translating for the benefit of patients.
Fantastic. I have a relative who's lived in Shepherd's Bush all her life, and she said that the Hammersmith Hospital has a reputation as the place that you don't want to be as a patient. Because basically, if it's got as far as being referred to the Hammersmith, then it's something that all the other hospitals can't deal with. But the fact that we have all these specialists very high level here means that it's the best place to get treatment if you do have something that's rare, unusual, or otherwise difficult to treat.
I'm pleased you said that, because we should reassure the audience.
No, it's a fantastic hospital. It's the best, but from a patient point of view, it means that you've gone quite far up the ladder with the severity of your illness. So also,
means you have an interesting disease.
Interesting disease. And interesting diseases make for case studies and papers, so that's good. Ottoline, you have the bird's eye view from the UKRI. How does it look from where you're sitting to have all these research councils underneath you, and then the MRC with its institutes? And how does an organisation like the LMS fit into the overall vision and mission for UKRI?
So UKRI, I guess, is one example of the important progress we need to make in research and innovation, in breaking down barriers, in getting rid of the balkanization you talked about between competing hospitals. And this is a multi-scale issue. So researchers in the audience will know that sometimes there is deep competition, even within a research group, which is totally unhelpful and inappropriate. And you can map it up across the scales through our society. It's about taking down barriers, and this is particularly crucial in research and innovation, which is about moving into the unknown. It's about trying to explore and understand ideas, parts of our world where people have not been before. That's inherently quite a frightening thing to do. You have no idea what you'll find out. You might find out nothing. Things might fail for technical reasons. It's possible we might reject your grant application, all of these kinds of things that you're having to deal with. And it's much, much easier to do that in the context of a community of people working together to move into the unknown, rather than people fighting one another. And it's much more effective use of resource, and much more creative as a way to generate and understand new ideas, where you've got multiple people with different ideas and experiences contributing. And that's true within the Institute. We've looked around, it's very much set up to drive that kind of collaboration across disciplines and between people. But more excitingly, that's true within our society. So you've talked about public engagement, and you've talked about the excitement and joy of bringing science out into communities. I think that's brilliant. It's wonderful. I am at least as interested in bringing the ideas from communities into science. This is about how you take the extraordinary tools that research and innovation give to every single one of us to understand the world around us and the problems we face, and share those tools completely widely. And that means, people who think they don't have those tools, but they do, sharing them with people who think they have those tools, even when they might not have them to the fullest extent that they can. So properly shifting the position of research and innovation in our society so that it is by everyone and for everyone, I think is really critical as we move into the 21st century with the many challenges that we're facing in the world. Making sure that we spend the significant amount of taxpayers' money with which we've been entrusted in a way that brings people together and to solve the challenges that we're facing. That's the critical goal we have. right across everything. This is to break down these barriers. UKRI is in a great position to do that because we bring together all of those different councils that you've talked about. And this site, I think, is a really brilliant illustration of that, of how you can root a world-leading research endeavour in a place embedded in communities, focusing on things that people really care about, so that their experiences and understanding of their health and the challenges to their health can come into the research, into the laboratory, and contribute to making the endeavour as successful as it can possibly be.
So you touched a little bit on research culture, which I wanted to pick up about, and you've identified that there's a contradiction sometimes in the need to make sure that we use taxpayers' money to the absolute most efficient and best use that it can be put, and therefore we need to make sure that money is being diverted in the correct way, in the right way. But at the same time, if that means fostering competitions in the way of grant funding, that leads to competitive environments in which people are pitched against one another. So how do we square that circle to foster a really supportive research environment at the same time as ensuring we have
absolutely
value for money?
So competition is a very interesting beast. I've always viewed it as humanity versus the problems. We're competing with the world to address these problems, rather than competition between people. Nonetheless, realistically, there's a fixed sum of money, although we would hope to grow that over time in a whole variety of ways. And there will always be more ideas that are worthy of pursuing than there is money. So then one has to figure out some way to allocate the funds in a way that captures the best portfolio across the whole piece, to move things forward, to address those challenges. So it will always be there. It doesn't actually pit individuals against one another. There's no reason for it to do that, but we, in our infinite wisdom as researchers and innovators, have made it that way, because the culture in research and innovation is very heavily now about individuals, their individual contribution, their individual, where they are on the publication list, all the rest of it. We all sit around those assessment panels and people say, yes, but what did this person do? And I think we need to find much better ways of assessing certainly the unique contribution a person makes, but in the context of a team, a shared endeavour to tackle a problem, so that we're not asking everybody to compete in a way that requires them all to do the same thing, because that is inherently homogenizing. And what we need is those really diverse teams with different people with different inputs and different skills to shift the way these problems work. So competition will be there, but the rules for winning the competition are completely under our control. If we can get those right, you build a community where everyone's valued. If you get them wrong, you drive people apart, and that kind of cutthroat hoarding, which is bad for science. What we need is a culture change then toward that community building ethos. We have a role at UKRI in shifting the incentive to support that, but everybody has a role in the way they act every day to make that a reality.
Fantastic. I'm glad you mentioned teamwork, because I just wanted to bring you back in, John. You were cited in a report by the Academy of Medical Sciences in, I think, 2019, which was all about team science and how we build those collaborative cultures. And in particular, I think the section that you were quoted in was about how team science was recognised in the research exercise framework. So could you talk a little bit to that?
Yeah. So just for everyone's benefit, the research exercise framework is an exercise that is organised by UKRI, and it's
in collaboration with the devolved administration.
Hang on a second, let me finish my sentence. In collaboration with devolved administration, it's basically a review of activity across all the UK's universities, and it has three aspects that are assessed subject by subject, which are the environment, research environment. Well, look, you're in what we would call a 4-star environment here, I can tell you. But also the impact. So this is really important. This is how those researchers have taken what they've done and moved it forward for the benefit of humanity. So this can be anything from breeding fish which are resistant to pancreatitis. Who knew? But farmed salmon get pancreatitis, and it's a real problem. Through all the way through plant science, social science, arts and humanities, to what might be more obvious to us in this setting, for example, doing some key work that led to the development of a drug like statin or something like that. And the final piece is an assessment on what are called outputs, which are published components that come out of the higher education institutes. And I usually, again, in the terms we're talking about, papers. So I'd like to start by saying, I think part of the key journey that Ottoline has described will be how we define the rules for the next research exercise. And this is something that we're thinking about very closely. We're thinking about it very closely. I sort of wear two hats in this context, not only as a part of UKRI, but by happenstance, I chaired the components of medicine and life sciences for the last exercise, which ended this time last year. We need to think really carefully, because this is a major incentive for universities to get right, okay? Because in the end, money comes on it. So we can set the rules to try and encourage the kind of team science and team approaches that Ottoline has described. But I don't think we should see ourselves as being in a bad position in many subject areas, including those germane to the activities here. We're actually already quite a long way on the journey. So the way I look at it is, what can we do to accelerate that journey, as opposed to having to make the first steps? And it's if I make a really crass generalization, there are some brilliant examples from the sort of work that goes on in this building, of working with engineers, working with physicists, sometimes working with mathematicians. If you look at, for example, the subdivisions that we had to look at, the epidemiologists and the public health doctors, if you look at the outputs that they create, actually it's hard to find stuff that is monodisciplinary. And the majority of them are already team science. And that's because they're dealing with terabytes of data. They're dealing with concepts that are not only big in terms of the way humans think about it, but actually in terms of what they have to handle. And they're working with a whole range of people from the physical and data sciences in order to deliver their research. So there are lots of models we can follow. We have the opportunity to create really key incentives. And if I end, and I don't mean this to end on a negative, but I think we learned a really important lesson going back about 15 or 20 years, when that personality of the individual that Ottoline described meant that we were always obsessed with who was the first author of the paper, or who was the last author of the paper. And we have a whole group of people who are on virtually every medical paper of importance to people in this room, who are people like statisticians, pathologists, and laboratory technicians, who got buried in the middle and everyone ignored them. Now we've emphatically moved on from that. So in the last ref, and the ref before that, that didn't matter. And we made that decision positively, because we could see our behavior having a really negative effect on our capacity to deliver science. That's probably wrong to end on a negative note, but please do remember what I said. We're actually quite a long way down the journey, but we need to accelerate.
And I think it's something that we have a big focus on here. We're signatories to the technicians' commitment.
Yep.
Have we got our technicians in the room? We have got some, I know. Yes.
Good.
They're doing a fantastic job, and we're about to start a whole series of events through 2023 to really build a community amongst that cohort. Yeah. We also have a very well organised PhD and postdoc cohort who lead on a lot of activities, and I think that community building is really important.
And we can establish PhD programs that discipline hopping as well. And don't forget, everyone, what Jonathon said about what else is on this campus. If you've got physicists just down the road, we can have a cup of coffee with them.
Absolutely.
It doesn't half make a difference to building these sorts of relationships.
Well, so just come to you, Jonathon, then. So sometimes people have seen my Imperial lanyard, go, oh, you work in South Ken. I'm like, Acton. So when building a White City site, which was a fairly inglorious site between two very, very busy roads, but is now, quite an incredible sort of feat of architecture. You can build the buildings and you can bring the departments, so you can make people come here. But how do you build that collaborative culture? I mean, Imperial's across all these campuses. How do you make people feel like they're part of one, because even we've got this amazing new building, but actually the LMS isn't just this building. We have other pockets on the site as well. So how do you make people feel like that as one?
So Lindsay, I think proximity is the first thing. So I think trying to bring people together in co-location is one step towards multidisciplinary work, but it's not the only. And as Ottoline was saying, you can get problems within a laboratory in terms of interaction. So you try to put in as many processes as possible, at many levels as possible, to encourage and facilitate working across groups and working across disciplines. So we do that by using funds, any funds we can lay our hands on. And that means funds from UKRI and MRC, funds from NIHR, the so-called Biomedical Research Centre.
Imperial is good at getting funds.
Right, it's our job to
It's a
get
talent.
funds. So where we can use these funds internally to drive or to promote working across groups by having competition. So university workers and institute workers love competition. And so running competitions where you have to work, set up projects across completely new disciplines where you're joining together. Like John said, across maths and biophysics, across fundamental cell biology, working with mathematics and so on. And so LMS has been very successful, having some of its own programs to do that, both at doctoral level and postdoctoral. But we need to do it really all levels of the organization. And yeah, then you need your sandpit meetings, your joint seminar series, a bit of money for projects and joint PhDs, other opportunities, anything we can do to foster it, because it's about the people at the cutting edge of doing the work, getting to know each other, because they just don't know. Someone who's working in maths, completely different department. But if you can get them meeting together around the idea of winning some money, that's how it all starts, and that's what you build on.
Fantastic. I know we are, yes, sorry, support that. We are really grateful to have like this amazing social space here, which I think is going to be a fantastic space, already is a fantastic space for collaboration, getting to know other people who are working here, and also bringing in people from elsewhere and saying, let's grab a coffee on the 7th floor, and you bump into all kinds of interesting people, and that's where collaborations can start. So I just want to go back a little bit. So we're talking about sort of being in the community. And also you mentioned public engagement. And we're going to talk in a bit more detail about this in the panel after the break. But I wanted to first of all ask a bit more about what we know that the UKRI strategy is to bring everyone with us. We need science not to be seen as elitist or behind brick walls, but something that is part of our communities. How in your opinion is the best way to achieve that, for us to do that?
Well, so UKRI just published its public engagement strategy, which I hope everybody's read, and we are working to try and build the join up in both directions. So obviously we're keen to support the whole research and innovation community, and I would include everybody who contributes to research and innovation. I'm just back from a trip to the Antarctic, where one of the UKRI research institutes is on the Antarctic Peninsula. It's a Natural Environment Research Council institute. And one of the things that's so powerful about having been there for a few days is that sense of community. Now, obviously, if you're working in that kind of challenging environment, yes, but it does mean that everybody gets that, the people doing the washing up are actually at least as important as the people, doing the ice core drilling, and the people analyzing. So that notion of the research and innovation community as everybody in that community contributing is very, very palpable there, and there's no reason why that shouldn't be the case everywhere, including in this institute. You talk, and people tend to go PhD students, postdocs, technicians. There's people like you, yeah? And all kinds of, there are many, many roles in a research institute. Where I worked in the institute I directed before I took on this role, key part of the institute team was this amazing security guard. He was just an absolutely wonderful guy. When you came in the morning, he was there, with just very cheery, good morning, how are you? just that makes a huge difference to how you feel as you walk through the door into your workplace, sets a tone that can keep you going through, you know, everybody contributing to that set of people doing the amazing things that they do. That's critical, and it creates a much wider interface for interactions with wider society. So a much wider range of people can see someone like them or someone doing a role that they themselves would be excited about doing, contributing to that research endeavour. So I think that's one element of it, is really broadening out how we as members of the research and innovation community think about our community. And then the other key element is coming in from the other direction, so to speak, empowering community groups who care about this stuff to reach towards us in the way in which those groups want to. So funding for public engagement via funding the community groups, not funding the researchers. So those are some of the key elements that I think we need to take forward. And in terms of the community here, obviously you've got the Research and Innovation Community Institute. I think in a medical domain, there's already very high quality work with patient groups and so on, and much wider community around hospitals of volunteers who come in to support patients. It's already a much more diverse community, so you're in a great place to start, really to build those connections, to understand what all of those different people care about and how you can involve those people with the work of the Institute in its broadest sense. And so I'm excited to see that how that grows over the years.
Fantastic. I was speaking to someone recently about the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, and there was a similar culture change issue that they had, which was that traditionally promotion had all been through the uniformed ranks. So you would start off as a firefighter and you become a watch manager, and you'd go up to become a commander, and sort of bronze, silver, gold command. And everybody else in the fire service was seen as support service, but were non-uniform. And they did a massive amount of work around culture change, which was about integrating those streams of people. And so now they have lots of senior people who have come through non-uniform ranks, and there is no longer that kind of separation. And in a way, I think building this teamwork where you know, everyone who's contributing to everything that comes out of the building is seen as, you know, part of this big team, you know, can be a really beneficial way to look at it. I know that in the fire service we've seen as a massively positive change.
If I might, I mean, there's a direct parallel there. I've worked a lot in you know, various kind of equality, diversity, and inclusion contexts over the years, and there is an absolute standard thing to do in the research career to draw a line. I've done it myself for many years. You know, it goes undergraduate, PhD, postdoc, fellowship, you know, whatever. I mean, and everybody draws this line, and then they write numbers on the line, and they say, oh, it's terrible. You know, we're hemorrhaging people. We've got to get rid of that line. We have to think about the research and innovation community, people coming into that community to contribute in some way, going out to contribute to the much wider domain, coming back in again, so that the career path that you draw as an individual can go left, right, and centre. And at the moment, a key element of that is making sure that we can appoint people, for example, in the university context, who have not followed that route at all, but rather have you know, followed a career, for example, in industry, and then want to come in to a more academic context later. And obviously in the medical context, there are a huge range of opportunities, either from the point of pharmaceutical companies or from the point of view of frontline health care delivery, really driving up diversity in the set of people who are contributing to research and innovation in the broadest sense. Diverse experiences, diverse backgrounds, diverse career paths, I think is going to be critical to tackling some of these really difficult challenges that we have, where having that breadth of expertise and experience is going to be crucial.
Well, the concept of porous walls is a kind of, you know, in the last few years has become more sort of common in talking about engagement and having the inside out and the outside in. And I think it's really nice to think about that, not just as scientists and publics, but about scientists going in and out and maybe coming back and maybe going off and do something else and maybe coming back, but still feeling that as part of a career path that's taking them forward, you know, whether or not it's in a very straight line or whether or not it takes more of a weaving path. So segueing neatly because I'm going to have to finish in a few minutes, but I did want to talk about your book. Obviously, art is one of the things that can transcend, these kind of barriers. We've got some amazing art in the book and in the exhibition outside, and of course, we have hit on this issue of we are a research institute. It's not an open public space, so this isn't an open art exhibition, but we would like to take it somewhere else so that more people can get to see what's in it. But I wanted to come to you, John, and just to ask about your contribution, because your contribution was created by you. If we could have the slide up, please. Can you tell us a little bit about this and your relationship to art and how that interacts with your science?
Right. I've always enjoyed drawing, and at times in my life I've enjoyed painting. How's it? When I'm thinking about my science, I will sit down with a bit of paper and draw diagrams, and often in quite cartoonish form, sometimes thinking about the way cells interact, thinking about processes. I probably have quite I suppose, a visual way of working, if you will. I'm going to say something now that probably a lot of late middle-aged people say, which is, I wish I had more time to paint. I mean, the simple fact is that I find that to do painting or drawing for pleasure, you do kind of need to create a compartmentalized period of time. And my current activities make that a bit challenging. Although we had the build around 2 days ago, and my wife and I are trying to get a garden room put in so that she can do stuff that she does. She does upholstery, and I can paint. We can have stuff lying out so that I get on with it. With respect to this particular picture, I sometimes draw and paint buildings, generally landscapes. My wife comes from the very far north of Scotland, and we regularly holiday in Wester Ross, which is a long way from West London. It's sort of top left-hand corner if you're looking at a map of Britain. And it's quite a remarkable landscape, not just because in places it's very barren and very mountainous, but it's also the point of the UK mainland where the North Atlantic drift hits. So that although you might think it would have a climate that's really harsh, it's not. It's actually incredibly mild, and there's a National Trust garden that grows all sorts of extraordinary plants given its latitude in the village that we go and stay in. Like my colleague here, Professor Weber, I'm a very keen fisherman. So when I'm up there, I spend a lot of time walking and going fishing. And particularly the walking, and this is just one trail that I love, I can just get completely lost. And thinking about health, it is probably when I am at my most calm mentally. It's probably when I feel most vigorous, most alive, most vital, if you will. And I just love it. And some years ago, it was actually at the time my father-in-law was dying, and it was a pretty grim time in the family, but because we were kind of hovering in and out of intensive care in Inverness, I had time to paint. And I'd done this walk and done a quick sketch, and I just came back and painted this. And it reminds me of that feeling of calmness and vitality and life.
Fantastic. And Jonathan, your contribution to the book was a portrait that hangs near your office in Imperial College of Amroth Wright. Could you tell us a bit about him and why you choose it?
So this is Amroth Wright, sort of forgotten hero, really, of British bacteriology. So almost every day for 30 years, I passed this portrait as I came into work at St Mary's. And I've always found it a penetrating study. It's by Gerard Evans, who was a sort of society portraitist of the 30s. So this man worked his whole life on developing vaccines. At the very beginning of the 20th century, he developed the first typhoid vaccine, which was really the first fixed and activated bacterial vaccine, which really laid the foundation for all modern vaccinology. And he did the first real, sadly non-randomized, clinical trial of it by immunizing the troops of the Second Boer War and then the First World War. So, and at St Mary's, he put up a building at St Mary's to make the vaccine and immunized about 4.5 million troops during the First World War, and showed those who had his vaccine had a very significantly lower rate of death from typhoid fever than those who didn't, and probably saved more lives, because typhoid was a massive killer of troops in those days and for years afterwards. So this man really was the founder of modern vaccinology. He also was quite good at spotting talent. He recruited Fleming, recruited Coleman and others. They all worked for him. And so he's a great man in scientific terms, but his personality was terrible. He was a really profound misogynist and wouldn't have women in the laboratory. And so his reputation is very, very mixed. And he's become a bit of a persona non grata. And my response to, because he left money for a series of lectures and things in the college, is to recruit women to chairs in his name. I feel that repudiates his position while remembering his extraordinary contributions. And it's this sort of conflict in him that I find so interesting, and in us now in terms of how we look at him. So that's my portrait of health.
Fantastic, thank you. And then finally, and I'm just going to open up to questions from the audience in a second, but Ottoline, if you could just tell us a little bit about your kite, which has become a bit of a theme for the whole Picture of Health exhibition.
So this is actually a picture, I consider to be a picture of my niece, who's the little girl there, chasing a kite. And my sister, it was taken by my brother-in-law, and my sister sent it to us just at the time when the kind of invitation came round to contribute to this really brilliant idea, I think. And it goes back a little bit, I think, to what John was saying about vitality and kind of joie de vivre is how I kind of thought about it, this kind of joy of being alive and the freedom to explore the world, which is something that as scientists we really cherish, I think. And so it captures simultaneously, I think, this kind of vibrant health of a child running in a wonderful environment. I'm a plant scientist by background. I worked on jute branching for a long time, so lots of pictures of lovely branchy trees relates to my science, and the ability to kind of explore that environment in a free way, I think, is something that, yeah, it's very exciting and joyous. And that then, I think, maps directly onto the concept of health. Health has got to be about the joy of life and really enjoying living. And for me, yeah, this really captures that joy of living, to run in the wild and pursue your ideas. So there.
I think it's interesting because it's not the only kite. There was another kite in the collection, and that's one of the reasons why it's become a little bit of a metaphor. I love the idea of this blue skies, the blue sky research, the freedom to do this very basic, fundamental discovery research is something that's absolutely important for us, for human sort of needs and desires, but also in the wider sort of research community. So have I got any questions from the audience? The floor is yours. If you would like to ask a question, could you please wait for the microphone to come for the benefit of people who are watching online?
Hi, I really liked Ottoline's statement about trying to get away from the kind of hero model of science. But I'm just really trying to understand whether this is not exactly the same as trying to get away from the unidisciplinarity, which is where the conversation kind of turned to later. So I'm just trying to understand whether I would like to hear your ideas about trying to promote this kind of new model of team science beyond just, mixing three heroes from three different disciplines.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. We were actually talking earlier about ERC synergy grants, which are wonderful interdisciplinary grants, but they do very much fall into the mixing together 3 heroes from a bunch of different disciplines. And that hierarchical thinking is in my view, actually quite destructive to creativity, even when you've got 3 wonderful people collaborating in a wonderful way. So I think you're absolutely right that the evolution away from the hero scientist has got to go way beyond the notion of interdisciplinarity. And there are very few situations in research and innovation more broadly where one person can it's the hero model. I quite often refer to it as the lone genius model. And that lone geniuses really can't make much progress these days, even in the incredibly lone genius-y subjects like maths. The big challenges are usually solved by teams of mathematicians all focused on this one very specific problem. So it's not about interdisciplinarity. It's about the creativity of that you get, the very demonstrable and research verified value add from multiple people talking to one another and sparking off one another and looking at things in different ways and bringing different experiences, different analogies into how you think about things. And I think that's crucial. And then that's fundamentally about diversity, different people with different ideas and different understandings, working in an environment where difference is actually welcome. And if someone disagrees with you, you think, oh, that's interesting, and come in. A huge problem with our current environment, anchored in the kind of hero model, is that if somebody disagrees with you, you pull out. That's threatening, and we've just got to reverse that in our culture, and it's difficult to do because we're also human, and disagreement has a conflict flag on it, which is hard to overcome. So we have to build these cultures where disagreement actually has a welcome thing. I can loop back to my brother-in-law, who is called Phelan McDermott, and he works in theatre, in improvisational theatre. There is this brilliant concept in improvisational theatre, which is really crucial for research and innovation, which is yes and, where somebody puts their idea in, and the next person has to say yes and, not no, and not yes but, yes and that brings people together. And improvisation is actually fundamentally what research and innovation are about. Based on data and the platform, you have some constraints, but not as many as you think you do.
That's fantastic. It's also, just to pick up, so obviously Vika is started here. We're going to be speaking to her in the panel in the second half, but is keen that we're going to adopt this challenge-based approach to research. And in order to come up with those challenges, we're going to be doing co-design. The co-design, like improv, also comes from a place where you say yes and. There is no such thing as a wrong answer. Everybody's point of view is taken on board, and everybody's point of view is incorporated somehow in some way, especially when you're doing that messy bit at the beginning when you have to throw all the ideas out before you can focus them in to something else. Any other questions? Yes.
Thanks a lot for the discussion. It was very reassuring to hear lots of the topics that were brought, but especially the part of attracting scientists from around the world. Now, after Brexit, one of the problems seems to be the current rate of tuition and fees. I wanted to ask if there's any plan or intention or policy to try to solve that, so talent from around the world can come to this institute, and specifically, but also to this country. Thanks a lot.
Is an issue. I think that's another one for Ottoline. Really?
Yeah,
I think it's PhD fees.
I couldn't hear all of
Was it the level of
that.
PhD?
Of PhD, yes, that's where the tuition and fees are paid.
Actually, the level of PhD fees,
University.
we don't get to set the PhD fees. Universities set them. It's quite a complex area, so people, I think, don't recognise fully that the fee that a home student pays is made up of 2 parts, only one of which people see in the grant, the other of which comes as a block through Research England. So the difference between a home student fee and a overseas student fee is less big than one might think, but nonetheless it exists. And how one balances proper funding for a student versus student numbers is always a tension. So if we're going to give more money to each student, either in fees or in stipend, Either we have to have more money altogether, which is difficult at the moment, or we have to have fewer students, and that's an interesting point.
I would just add, one of the many agonies of Brexit has been over PhD student fees for students coming from Europe, because when we were part of the European Union, obviously they classified a home in the EU, and now they're classified as foreign, and they pay a full international fee, which at universities like Imperial is very high. And there is no easy solution to this. This is now a legal requirement to differentiate home and all international, and it's to the detriment of UK science and to the university. But we are where we are.
And the amount you set is not a legal requirement. You can choose anything you like.
This is true. But, the only way we keep the lights on in a university is through international students. Yeah. And we subsidise the research, even possibly the research from UKRI. Much of which.
So I feel the need to step in the middle here and inject some calmness and offer a crumb of comfort to my two friends. So everyone needs to understand that UKRI works with universities very closely to try and make all of these systems work, and they are difficult. And I have huge sympathy also with Jonathon, having been the dean in Edinburgh, which had another layer of complexity because it's under a devolved administration as opposed to UK government. And I think Imperial has a particular challenge because actually it doesn't have an arts faculty. And if you look at most UK universities, they actually charge fees and international fees to arts students in order to subsidise major parts of their science endeavour. So I'm offering a bit of extra sympathy to Jonathon here because it is the Imperial College of Science and Technology. You're not off the hook completely.
I agree that one of the main a huge challenge that we have to look at now is the overall sustainability of the research system and its resilience. And it's quite complicated again. So research grants, which are open competition that researchers love because they get to apply for funding to do whatever they like. It's competitive, but that's that kind of freedom. The way the system currently works is we pay 80% of the full economic cost. Because of the level of competition, there is a tendency for people to underestimate the full economic cost because they think that makes their grant look more attractive. So actually, we think we only pay low 70% by the time that's been taken into account. That's a behavioural response to the 80%, which is interesting. The rest can come from a variety of sources, but for every pound that goes in through that route, 63p go in through the Research England block grant, which is at least enough to cover that 20% difference in principle, although that also covers, there's a lot of calls on that 63p. So it's tricky. Now, to me, one of the key issues is the extent to which the rules in the current research excellence framework drive universities to hire more and more and more principal investigators, back to the lone genius hero model, because that's currently the unit that counts volume through which that QR is calculated. So we've embedded in the system quite a complicated set of incentives that, in my opinion, and indeed with some data, result in the overhiring of PIs, the underhiring of support staff, the overthinning, therefore, of all kinds of other elements of the system, and they actually drive you into an unsustainable position. And so I think a key element in our REF reform needs to be somehow to adjust the volume measure to take away that incentive to hire more and more and more PIs, but rather to incentivize building with that QR money a more holistic understanding of the research culture, which in principle could inherently be more sustainable, even without adjusting the balance in the amount of cost on grant, for example. And unless we do that, it doesn't matter how much we adjust those things, we'll still just drive more and more and more growth and more thinning. So all of these things have to come together.
And I should state, bringing sustainability into the discussions and arguments has been something that you've led, which has been really important, because before the discussion has solely been about growth. And that's true.
And sustainability, I think, is something that we all want: sustainability, security, and the ability to grow in our own space and in our own time. I think I'm just going to draw this to a close now because it's one more.
Been waiting for ages.
I'm so sorry, sir. Please.
Yeah, Ian Needleman from University College London. So it's been a really great conversation, very inspiring, very interesting to hear the emphasis on team science. I think that's so crucial. And Ottoline, you've also brought up the crucial importance of community engagement, and not engagement, but also direct involvement in research, and that of people with lived experience also. Jonathon, you've also made a very key point of how powerful REF is as a driver of change. So I wonder, in the development of a new strategy, how can we bring this together? How can we ensure that the communities, the people with lived experience, the public, help to drive the new REF agenda?
Absolutely. So I think the whole notion of higher education providers, research organisations as key, their civic role, where they are, that place role, I think is critical, and how we embed that in the way we think about the REF in the context of all the elements, in the context of what counts as an output, in the context of what we consider in the research environment element, and of course, perhaps most obviously in the context of how we think about impact. So we can change all of those things. And to do that well, you're absolutely right. We need to understand and not, we can't impose on that our ideas of what good looks like. We need to understand what good feels like to people living in a particular place. And yeah, so I agree with you. We need to think about all of those things holistically as we revise the REF. I would say that in the context of what we assess, we have a little bit more time to get that right between now and the next exercise, which will be in some amount of time, 5, 6, whatever it is, years. In terms of the signalling of the direction of travel, we have to do that soon because universities need to know about that as they step up their own strategies locally.
I wonder if we need another REF.
So do I.
Well, no, I think Ottoline's faced it perfectly. No, Ottoline's faced it perfectly. We need to give the signals out to universities soon. But I think you put your finger on something which is going to be a real wrestle to get right. But I think understanding in the environment what institutions do and play with respect to their civic roles is going to be so important.
Yes, it's an absolutely important question. Do we need one at all? At which we are absolutely asking in a very serious way in collaboration with the equivalent bodies in the devolved administrations. It's difficult, given that we have already talked about the challenges with the current incentives in the system. You'd have to make a strong argument for giving up the access to that lever. In the context, furthermore, of needing to account for £2 billion a year that goes into just the English universities from our budget through that mechanism. So both to get accountability for that money and to ensure that we are using the incentives for paying it out as wisely as possible to optimize the system, it would take quite a lot to give it up.
But it doesn't have to be conducted like we did last night. He was on one of the panels.
It's a huge amount of work, but I should say, David Sweeney was always very fond of pointing out that even when you take into account how much it costs universities to run the exercise, it's £2 billion a year with an assessment once every 7 years. So that actually the administrative costs, even taking into account the university's costs per pound, is smaller, significantly smaller than for your average one postdoc research grant.
I think if you're worried about the REF driving adverse behaviour,
yes,
stopping the REF is a way. Stopping that adverse behaviour.
Well, this is sounding a little bit like gun control in the US.
definitely to look at it. Of course, as part of Imperial, the Faculty of Medicine returns to REFS as an MRC core funded, we instead have QQR. I think some of the same issues that surround and debates surround
and
have
those
also
are fully under our control.
Yeah.
We need to get them right.
Yeah, we need to get them right, which is a great note to end the panel discussion on. I'd like thank you very much for. Just before we go out to the break, where there's cakes and tea and coffee waiting, if I could have the next slide. I mentioned that the Ottolines was one of two kite images. You can't actually see the kite in this one, just the strip. But this is Faz. He is one of the people who worked until very recently in our post room as a kind of integral member of the support staff here. And he rediscovered, he's from Guyana, and rediscovered the art of kite making during pandemic. I'd just like to play a short film that we made about Faz and his kites and how he's brought them here before we go into the break. And then, yes, please do. And then you can have a go actually making your own kite during the break if you so wish.
When I was a kid, I was interested in kite flying. So I stopped doing it for a long period of time. And during COVID, I decided to make kites again. I've been working for the LMS for nearly 14, getting on to 15 years now. And today we're here to do a kite workshop, making kites with about 10 to 15 students.
People know that there's a sort of Imperial campus at Hammersmith, but I don't think they necessarily particularly know that much about the LMS. And I think part of that has been because we've been in just sort of a random building.
The new building is basically a state-of-the-art facility. It was made purposefully for translational and experimental medicine.
I love the big windows, and I think it'll be quite a fun space for us to have.
And I think this gives us an opportunity to interact more between the labs and at the same time improve the way we socially interact.
I think we just reverse engineering the kite. Normally, scientists love to have a proper protocol where we follow step by step.
I mean, for me, I think it's great to have a balance of both discovery-based research and also how you translate that into impacts later on.
I think there's a lot of bridge between art and science. Like, I think scientists need to be a little bit artistic in order to survive in this environment, because we need to have new ideas, we need to create new experiments. And for me, it's kind of like an art. I think it's great that we can combine both of them.
The more we try to help each other, the more we socialize among each other. This creates kind of a family that allows us not only to feel this like this is our home, but also improve our science. And I think we've done a pretty good job in that regard.
I would like to encourage everyone to come and fly a kite for the LMS. Many thanks. Now come go fly a kite.
So please do go and help yourself to teas and coffees and cakes outside, and we'll reconvene shortly for the second half. Thank you. Hello, welcome back. Welcome back, welcome back. I hope you have enjoyed having a look at the exhibition and having some of the lovely cakes that were on offer. This is our final panel of the day, but before we get into the discussion, at the beginning of the first panel earlier, we did have a health and safety talk. So we have an additional health and safety poem this time from one of our panelists. Our panelist is Michael D'Souza. He's originally from Trinidad. He's lived in West London, originally Ladbroke Grove from when he was age 8 in 1960. He's been an incredible activist, the voice of Black people living in West London. He has made a name for himself as a teacher of swimming to young kids, having grown up not knowing how to swim himself. And after he taught himself to swim, he then found his writing voice and perhaps became best known for being the creator of Rasta Mouse. If any of you are familiar with the fantastic CBBC series from quite a while ago now, but it was the first time there'd been a central Black character in an animation on British TV, and that you cannot be what you cannot see. Those things are so vitally important for young people, well, and for adults as well. And so having Rasta Mouse as a character, was a real game changer, I think, in many ways for the face of British television and what that does for engagement. Michael wrote a poem that's in our book, which he's going to be reading in a minute. But he also has another one, which is called Health and Safety, which he's going to perform first. So please welcome Michael D'Souza.
Afternoon, folks. Listen, I was going to say, after lunch, if you're not active, you fall asleep. So I want to get you active, right, folks? This is an interactive poem. It's the most serious part of the session. Don't worry, right? What I need you to do is just follow me, okay? All right, let's just start with it. It's a bit active, so if it's too much, just have a rest. Can we all go like this? In your clearest voice, can you say, whatever you pick, from your nose, please don't wipe it, on your clothes. Please don't flick it, on the floor, or try to kick it out the door. Please don't roll it in a ball and try to stick it on the wall. Please don't wipe it on your sleeve. Try to find a tissue, please. Thank you very much. Right, folks, this other poem is my contribution to the book, and it's about the word Irie. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the word Irie. Rasta Mouse uses it all the time at the end of his every episode or any book or anything like that. So I just thought what I wanted to do. Irie is a feeling where it's always positive. You never say, feeling terrible. I'm feeling terribly Irie. You don't feel terribly Irie. So basically, I wrote this poem to give you an idea of what sort of things are Irie. They say like, Irie is a word from a Caribbean land. Irie is the word of a Rasta man. A Rasta man is a Caribbean bloke. He has a serious face. He loves to joke. Now he created this special word that might sound strange or even absurd. Irie is a word that means a positive thing. It could be food or it could be bling. It could be night or it could be day. It could be the way your football teams play. When you're feeling Irie, you're feeling right. When you're feeling Irie, you're brighter than bright. When you're feeling Irie, you're as happy as could be. We all owe it to ourselves to feel Irie. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Take a seat. Do take a seat. I'd like to welcome now the rest of the panel. We have Susan Simon, who is the MRC Director of Capital and Estates. So she was the person signing all the checks. In the John. To bring about this building, she grew up in East Germany and moved to the UK in 2001, where she completed an MBA and a Master's in Construction Law and a Doctorate in Business Administration. She's been working for the MRC since 2010, always in estates and project managing. So Fariel Missy is our Community Engagement Officer from White City, Imperial College London's Community Engagement Officer. She is quite unique though, because unique in our team, because she was born and brought up in White City. So she is a local resident who is now also working for Imperial. So she knows exactly, you know, what the personality of White City is and what everyone thinks and feels. And she's done an absolutely incredible job in really breaking down those walls between academia and community in West London. So we're looking forward to hearing a bit more from Fariel. And finally, Vivka Alt, who is our new director, in many ways should need no introduction, but Vivka joins us from the University of Birmingham, where she was the William Wittering Chair in Endocrinology. Originally from Germany, she has lived in Birmingham for 20 years by way of San Francisco, and there was somewhere else. I forgot. Anyway, by way of several sort of research institutes. So just before we get started, I just wanted to mention a little bit about we're going to talk a little bit more about the LMS and its place in the community of West Londonere, and how do we make our walls porous? How do we engage with the people around us and our neighbours? And how do we do those things that Ottoline, you know, was saying were so important, which is to make people who are not directly involved with science feel that it is partly, it's theirs, they have ownership of it, they're part of it, and they can contribute to it. And you know, a lot of that is how we do that is through engagement, through community engagement, and through other forms of engagement. Here at the LMS, we have a very rich history of engagement. I only started here in September, so I'm not an expert in everything that's gone on, but thanks in no small part to the work of Mandy Fisher, who's been, you know, a very sort of obsessively encouraging of engagement in all its forms for a long time in her work here. One of the you might recognise one of the projects is Biomedical Picture of the Day, which comes out. So every day, every single day, there's an image that's put up, and we have a few paragraphs explaining what that image is. It would be something to do with biomedical sciences. Often it's work that's come from here or from other UKRI partners, but it can't cover everything. And you might recognise this particular picture here is Cat Heron. And what's interesting about there was a biomedical picture of the day that was chosen, which you might have seen the cladding on the building outside has this image sort of imprinted into it. So the very fabric of the building that we're in has engagement and science running all the way through it. There was supposed to be a neater segue into neighbours, because Cat Heron is about neighbouring cells and how they hold together. But what I really wanted to talk about was, you know, our neighbours in the community and in different communities. So first of all, I wanted to come to Vivka, very much the new kid on the block, but as a scientist, as often happens with scientists, you have worked and travelled all over the world. So what's your approach to kind of integrating into a new place, and what's your kind of vision for how we at the LMS can, you know, really integrate into you know, into White City community?
Yeah, thanks. And it's exciting. It was exciting to hear to listen to the previous discussion, because a lot of buzzwords that are really important to me and my attitude towards science and towards society were in there already. You know, like outreach, team science, yeah, innovation, incubation, being together as a team and working out new and exciting things. And obviously the LMS is a research institute of excellence where lots of bright investigators doing stuff, and I think I would be excited if we drive innovation further by bringing people together to work, which they do already, yeah, like sort of, but to work explicitly as teams on big challenge problems. Yeah, so on big questions that are important for us to understand, mechanisms that are important for us to understand, to improve human health, and by this also society. And the approach we will take is what I call, or what's it's an established word, transdisciplinary. So transdisciplinary means, for one, we bring together all kinds of different scientific disciplines. And my experience is, having worked with computer scientists, with mathematicians, with engineers, that all the scientists, the different groups of scientists don't speak the same language. Yeah, like sort of, and we need to learn to understand each other's languages to more effectively collaborate. But transdisciplinary is more than interdisciplinary. It means that we listen from the start, also from all the voices around us, yeah, which importantly includes the community, includes entrepreneurs, people who have lived experience, the community around us, children, people who possibly aspire to be scientists, yeah. And that we take this in from the start to see our work in a perspective, and so that we don't have a monochromatic scientific perspective only, but that we hear lots of different ideas at the start and not do something and at the end then ask what could it be good for, yeah. So I think this is sort of like the important principles I see, and I think we are placed in a fantastic new building, thanks to and MRC, yeah, lots of contributions. I heard that you dreamed about it for 6 years now, so this
I think that there were quite a lot of people that were dreaming about this for a long time. So.
Yeah, exactly. So like sort of obviously lots of design ideas from Mandy, and persistence who was crucial to bring this together. And obviously I'm now excited to move in, not having worked on it for 6 years. Yeah, but I think this is a wonderful moment in time where we also come out of a very challenging period. We heard yesterday, I don't know, Wednesday or Monday was it, from Tuesday, Kevin Fenton, yes, from the head of public health, about and also from Michael Rosen, what challenge it presented to have COVID and to go through this. Also as scientists, we like to chat and have coffee. And obviously COVID didn't allow this anymore, Zoom coffees, but this is not as effective as if you meet in person. And I think this is now a really nice new call and release for all of us to come together, and obviously hopefully come together also with the community around us.
Fantastic. Susan, if I could come to you, so you've lived and breathed this building yes, for 6 years. What is you have masses of experience of doing this and making these kind of builds. What is important when you are in the planning stages of thinking, how can I best make sure that I come up with a building that's going to work best for the science and best for the scientists?
A lot is similar to what you just explained. So there's a language issue. You talk to architects and you talk to scientists. And I have sort of seen this so many times where the two speak to each other. Each thinks they understand what the other said, but actually they don't. They mean different things. Often I find scientists have a visual idea of what their lab looks like, and all this sort of thing. The architect starts from a function. They need to know what you're doing, and then they work out what it should look like. So there's a language issue there. But then on the other hand, a building like this or many others, you can't build them in isolation of a small group. It only works when the scientists, the architects, the M&E engineers, the structural engineer, all of these people need to work for the same aim. And I think with everybody knowing what their role is, everybody coming in with their expertise and all for the same aim, that works. I think that's all I can say. It's never without a hurdle. Will not be in your area either, when you have hurdles of some sort. So the big thing to do is to talk and validate what you hear. So you talk back and say, have I understood that correctly? And that's how you overcome this. And I wonder whether there's something similar between public and science, and also even science disciplines between them, that when you validate back what you hear, that you actually make clear that each side understands what comes across. But I think all these things are efforts of a wide community.
I think it's a really good point about the languages that people use. That's literal language, but also the languages of how people interact as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's testament to how well this was planned, that given the ridiculous complexity of a building like this and moving laboratories and everything, that everything actually went so smoothly. And yes, there was snagging, as you will always get in a new build, but given the complexity, it's been,
I think it's this one thing, where it looks very smooth on the top, paddling like crazy.
I know there are lots of people paddling. Yeah. Simon Pennell did a lot of paddling up and down the stairs, up and into it. Carol, if I could come to you. I just think it would be great if you could share with us a little bit more just about your experience of growing up in White City and what you feel, what does White City mean to you as a home, as a place you grew up and went to school, and then how that's segued into this career that you've got in this community engagement.
Yeah. So I grew up here, so I was born here and grew up here, and I went to the local school down the road. I don't know whether you guys know it, but Phoenix Academy in the heart of White City. And growing up, we didn't have all these amazing buildings and this incredible wealth of like businesses and, you know, Imperial and what it brings to the area. I think the main thing that we had was the adventure playground, which they're now getting rid of. But I mean, it was a great place where we all connected, got together, and learned a lot. And I remember a few years back, I was volunteering at Phoenix Academy because it's gone into special measures, and they asked me to talk to the young people and like give a speech about my experiences and why I decided to come back to my community and work here. And one of the sort of essential key things for me growing up was the people and what they brought and how they sort of influenced my decisions and my path and taught me a lot about what was outside of their state. Because not a lot of the young people and the families get out of sort of this area. Like the main places they would go to would be their state or West Coast, which, you know, only was developed not too long ago. And so, yeah, eventually came to Imperial. I've only been here for a year. And just before I basically got into this role, for me, like applying for this role, what I really loved about it was bringing the research and the academia together with the community and being sort of open and aware and acknowledging that the community also has its own wealth of knowledge and tools and resources. And how do you bring both worlds together where they both benefit, like mutually benefit from each other? And I think the panelists earlier and you guys were also mentioning that we have so many tools, so many resources, and it's all about how do we tap into it, and also how do we build that confidence within the local community, so grassroots charities, local residents, young people, how do you build the confidence within them to approach us, and not just approach us, but also the importance of us actually doing outreach work and going out there. And I remember the Great Exhibition Road Festival over the summer, so LMS was there, and you guys did this incredible workshop, and the community still mentions it till this day, and it was around DNA, like strawberries and DNA. And a lot of the families from White City had gone there, done the workshop, and it was just so intriguing to them that you can actually learn about DNA through strawberries, something that you eat every day on a daily basis that you wouldn't really think about is science, because science is all around you. But yeah, that's basically how I got here. And
fantastic. I still remember when I was just newly into lab to do my PhD, which was in the Commonwealth building next door. And it was literally just my first or second day or something. And I opened the fridge and there was a little Eppendorf with a little piece of what I thought looked like cotton wool on the bottom. And it said Tom's DNA. And my tiny mind was blown. You know, I'd done a degree. This is obviously in the dark ages because I'm ancient. But hadn't, you know, as an undergraduate, hadn't done anything with DNA. And there was Tom's DNA in a little Eppendorf in the fridge. So, you know, I still remember that sense of wonder myself, and it's one of the reasons I think why I really love to do engagement is why I really love to do engagement is because if you could share that kind of wonder, it can really make a difference. And some of the work that we've done, I love hearing that, you know, months later, maybe years later, families are still saying, I remember I purified DNA. You know, that's a legacy that makes a difference. So that's fantastic to hear. Michael, if I could come to you, you've lived in West London for a long time, and you've seen changes, you've seen gentrification, and that can bring some good things, but it can also bring some bad things. How do you know, how do we sort of square the need to develop buildings like this with the need to be sensitive to the people whose community we're living in?
Well, I think obviously you need some sort of consultation, so meeting with the people, and basically finding out, talking to the people more, letting them know what your plans are and what their visions are to adjusting to change. There's lots of changes. You said when I came to England and I came to London, I came to live in Southam Street. They demolished all our houses, all our buildings and things like that. and in turn, it just got rid of, decimated all the community. Fortunately for us, there was a sort of community in Ladbroke Grove, which was still just like a little basic sort of community. But we didn't have a clue what was going on. You know, we didn't know our communities were going to be decimated and people would move into West Drayton and all over. I think it's always most important to have consultation to give people an idea of what certain changes are going to need. Yeah.
And I think in general, I think we're mostly more sensitive to that. And maybe Susan, you can talk about, because these must be the issues that you come up against professionally, is that need to be sensitive when you have to do a muckle great development in the middle of a community.
I think here it was probably more an issue of minimizing the disruption, because it is already on a sort of a campus, a hospital campus, where sort of these sort of buildings are built, if that makes sense. But I think where we really could maybe contribute, and I think this event is one of those things. And maybe because I'm biased, right? I love this stuff, but when I look at these sort of things like the biomedical picture of the day, or you know, when people, what you explained with the strawberries, when people see what is there amongst their midst, you know, I think from anybody I've always talked about MRC, if that makes sense, they were always saying, "Oh wow, really, you're doing that? Oh wow, really, you're working on, I don't know, cancer or cardiovascular things. This is stuff that affects everybody." And when they see that there's something amongst their midst that actually is doing something about it, they're quite happy to have it there. You know, obviously it shouldn't be a monstrosity. And this building clearly isn't, I should hasten to add. But I think this is where the community is actually really supportive, because they can see what you're doing for them. Maybe not instantly, but I think in the longer term they understand it, and it's fascinating for the non-scientists to see what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think when we build capacity to go to community members and to share what we are trying to do, and as long as we listen to the community as well, there's always room for those dialogues, and that just makes things better. It comes back to speaking the same language and doing the same things. So in terms of engagement, Vibka, I know that you've already had some really amazing engagement projects in Birmingham, I think, with the DAISY PCOS program. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about that and what you see as your kind of, you know, vision for how we might engage, you know, here at the LMS.
Yes, I think, you know, like sort of it's important to reach out to all of the community, yeah, like, and not like biased to only fractions of community. And DAISY PCOS was created around this. When I first came to the UK, I actually recruited to a study including women with polycystic ovary syndrome. Yeah, that's a condition where you have irregular menstrual cycle, sometimes struggle to get pregnant. And this is also characterized by having high androgens, which are sometimes called male hormones. Yeah? And we now know that these women are at a very increased risk of having diabetes and high blood pressure and fatty liver disease, yeah? And cardiovascular disease. And we know also that this risk to have PCOS is much higher in women of South Asian origin and in Black women. Yeah? But the participation of Black women or South Asian women in studies to examine this is like mostly less than 1% of the community, so which does not allow to understand what's going on. Yeah, and when I came 20 years ago, we recruited to a study, and whatever effort we did was basically was less than 1%. Like sort of, so when I got the Welcome Investigator grant to examine the mechanisms, I right away also applied for a public engagement grant and worked with Caroline Gillett, you kindly interact with. And we said we need to go out and understand what people think. And we talked a lot to the South Asian community in Birmingham, and we found to our surprise, for example, that in some South Asian community, PCOS is seen as a sexually transmitted disease, as a shameful disease, and that women often even not go to the GP to talk about it, so have much less contact with the health services. So, and we decided then to recruit a community of 30 women, mostly from South Asian and Afro-Caribbean background, to provide them with leadership and mental health first aid training and so on, and work with them on developing public engagement for PCOS. And so first we were surprised by COVID, obviously, because we wanted a nice in-person event and so on. So we decided then to switch everything to online, which absolutely allowed us also to take women who were not living in Birmingham, but in London or elsewhere. Yeah. And now, obviously, since last year already, they have started to do a lot of engagement. And we also, during COVID, we did a lot of webinars, which had actually then also participation from Asia, from Africa, from Middle East, from the US, and has had a really nice uptake. We also developed information material, which was developed by the patients themselves. And this has actually led to our big cohort study, the DAISY PCOS study, recruiting 35% non-white women. Yeah, so like sort of, which is a huge success already. Yeah, and which will allow for the first time to analyze what their specific risks are and how we can go about it. This is just like one example, where we are looking in a way at very basic mechanisms. Yeah, it is very impactful.
100%. And Fario, maybe come to you. Could you talk a little bit about you've got some amazing programs that have come out of White City. Can you tell us about a few of those, and what's there and how it's working and how you've managed to sort of get out there and amongst the community?
Yeah, just to give you guys some context, so the community engagement team was only developed 5 years ago, and it was part of the civic strategy for the college, where with the developments of all these incredible buildings and all the research and academics coming down here, there was question around how do we ensure that we're actually connecting with the community and we're not just sort of like just based on their land and not doing anything with them. So in the first year and two, there was a lot of listening. So going back to your point earlier, a lot of like consultations took place, a lot of listening, going out and talking to different groups, and not just charities and grassroots groups, but also faith groups, schools, basically anyone, any stakeholder that had a massive sort of importance in the area and wanted to know what was going on, and ensuring that they were involved in the entire process. And from that, there were 4 needs that came up, and one of them actually stemmed from the pandemic. So the first 2 were the makerspace. So obviously the makerspace was created. I don't know how many of you actually do know the makerspace. Can I get a show of hands?
Quite good if you talked a bit about
Yeah,
it.
so the makerspace is this incredible high-tech space where there's 3D printers, all sorts of machinery and tools where young people aged 14 to 18 can like invent anything that comes to mind that will benefit society. Usually for them, it benefits their sort of community. And there's been inventions from trainers that play music all the way to when the heartbreaking Brentford situation happened, where a young person created this slide where you can basically pass your phone down and you can contact people if anything was to happen again, and God forbid, but a young person actually created it from there. And then there was another invention around, because knife crime is one of the biggest challenges in White City as well. So a young person created a vest that's stab-proof, for example. And all of that came from the Makerspace Challenge, which is a 10-week challenge where it's from beginning to end, and they're supported by student ambassadors who all have like different, skill sets, come from Imperial, and share that with them. And then the other program is the Families Program. So that's every school holiday, and that's to engage families. So there's a massive importance around parental engagement. So yes, we want to work with children, but we need to get to the parents first, because we want the learning to continue at home. And that's the only way that these, you can leave a legacy and it's sustainable. And the Families Program focuses on all sorts of science, and it works with researchers, and it supports researchers to translate their studies to basically language that the community can understand. And we've had things from learning about the universe in space. through Lego, which has been like a massive hit. And then the other super popular workshop is understanding color. Like, how do we see color? How does color exist? Through tie-dye. And the children get to take home, like, you know, tie-dye shirts and hats and scarves. And then we had 2 other programs. So the one that I mentioned that stemmed from the pandemic, which was around digital inclusion. So again, a massive need in the communities around the White City campus was sort of the older residents being unable to connect with their loved ones during the pandemic. And through that, in collaboration with the business school, we developed a digital sort of remote, well, it was hybrid to some extent, because obviously outside of lockdown, we wanted to meet in person. During lockdown, it was over Zoom. And it was all around supporting them with using their devices, so laptops, phones, tablets to communicate. And then I'm going to say post-pandemic, but I know we're still within it. We're still continuing with it at the Edward's Community Centre, which is a community centre down the road from here. And we've got all sorts of people attending, learning different skills. And like one of our most funny sort of stories is like we've got an older resident who attends because they love going on holidays and want support to, you know, book a nice little trip.
Fantastic.
And then finally, the Women's Community Leadership Programme, which is all around empowering local women. So again, another need within our community is a lot of single mums and women who are unemployed or have left employment to, you know, provide childcare. And they all want to support, and instead of going back to work, what they want to do is be able to develop their own ideas and support their communities and support like some of the needs and leave a legacy. And through the Women's Community Leadership Programme, which is a 6-week programme across 6 months, we support them from skills from business planning all the way to self-awareness, self-development, to understanding yourself as a leader, who are you as a leader within your community. And from there, there was also a request for networking events. So now we've also organised, and you attended one of our networking events not too long ago.
Some of the women on the leadership course, and it is absolutely inspiring, the work that's going on there. So well done for everything that you have. Michael, if I can come back to you, are there, you know, what we would love to do is like, you know, continue in the vein that Carol has started, break down some of these walls, engage communities with science and have people feel that science is for them. And we know that especially in underserved and underrepresented audiences, often the feeling of young people is that science is not for me, it's something that other people do. It's interesting, something that you said made me think about when I was a kid, I was about 10, I was going to school in Glasgow, quite a rough bit. And we had a residential trip. We were coming to London. And as we were on the train leaving Glasgow, there were, you know, some kids in my class, and they had never left the city before, and they were 11. And that was like really quite eye-opening. But I think sometimes we don't know our own privilege. Sometimes we don't know because we haven't seen the other side of the coin, that for many people, it's not easy, it's not accessible. And science can feel like one of these things that other people do. So how can we make it feel like it's more open? How can we best, as scientists and scientific community, serve our wider communities and engage people?
Well, I think you could always start with the schools. You know, going into the schools, doing little workshops, simple workshops, just getting students interested in science or realizing how interesting science can be. Well, I always think that's a good starting point with the community, because then the children will take it home and maybe various adults will have an interest in it. But to me, I would say when you get people from the science faculty, you just engage in schools, I would say. I think that's always a good starting point.
And it's definitely something that under the pandemic has not been very possible, but I think there's definitely a feeling that we want to get back out there and we want to engage. I know Mandy's discussed, told me before about some work that they did post Grenfell with the schools surrounding there and going into schools and really engaging. So I think that's a really great start. I just wanted to ask you a bit about your contribution to the book, if I can move on to that.
Yes.
Could you pop up, Nicholas? Can you? Can you talk a little bit about your contribution and why?
Well, this health and safety, I just think it came to me one day, you know, that children have things foisted on them sometimes. All this thing like health and safety and this and that. And it's all right, it's okay. But I always believe that sometimes children get left out. So why I created this, the health and safety, to say, well, yeah, this belongs to you. This is not health and safety that you can ignore. You know, so this is that was my idea behind it, to make it fun. But I mean, as we all know, you know, parents or whatever, picking a nose business is not great.
Absolutely.
But it's common in you know, it's common. So that's the thing that I think that really sort of inspired me to give something to the children, which generally is seen as something quite serious. But this is just put in a very fun way for them. So that was that.
I think ownership is empowering, and so when you give ownership of things to people, then they are empowered to because they feel part of it.
Exactly, because I work a lot in schools. I do a lot of workshops. I do Rust the Mouse. I do this fella, Little Bruv. And what you've noticed is that all the children have got their various bits of talent, all of them, but they don't always get a chance to express it. So this is why I created a book which was designed by Mr. Richard Adams there, who was the designer of this book, because I wanted to write a series of poems that can be recited, as opposed to just, you know, you just sitting down and I'm in front of an audience just reading or reciting or whatever, to include people. So what that does, when you go into schools, at first, children are a bit reluctant. But then when this one goes with the other one, they all come up there and all volunteer to say it. So it'll help their confidence in presenting things, you know, and that was a basic idea. So you could, you know, we can all just feel confident that we've always got something to offer to this world and contribute to the world. And that's really always my aim, to encourage children to know that they're very much part of the world, and what they do has an effect on the world. That's why I designed this series of poems and rhymes.
Fantastic, that's absolutely brilliant. Just to relate that to some engagement work that I've done previously, which was all around, it started out from that standpoint of people thinking it's not for me, science is not for me. And so we set up this festival that was all based around, you know, a theoretical or a fictional natural disaster. But we would say to kids and families, we need you to help us to save the world. Yes, you, absolutely, specifically you, and we'll give them an ID badge. And that, you know, we found that, you know, our evidence from evaluating that showed that it really did, you know, that it is for you, it's really for you, absolutely you, really makes a difference. Susan, could I come to you now and ask about your contribution to the book? Because you are, again, an artist, as John was earlier.
I would go that far, but
leather work. Please
having spoken about the biomedical picture of today, so that's this series of images that come out of the research, more or less. And this one is, the scientist will shut me down probably, but it's the innards of a fruit fly, essentially. And I just think, when I show it to people that have no science background, they think it's a flower, right? It's so beautiful. I just find these images fascinating. And it shows to me that sort of biology or the natural world is beautiful well beyond what we can see. And so I'm just fascinated by this particular picture. And this work is basically that's carved out of leather. I love working with leather, and it's very therapeutic because you sit all day and doing this. But it was just I felt that would represent my sort of amazement of what the scientists are doing. I mean, the LMS, but also what I see in LMB and in other institutes. I find it just mind-boggling when the scientists can explain, and they can explain very well in idiot-proof language, as I call it, what they're doing. And I just find it fascinating, and I'm in absolute awe of that. So that's why that was
I think it's one of the wonderful things, and you can see it in the art exhibition, and you can see it in art and in science all over the places, is how nature will replicate these different looks, you know. So I was thinking the other day, it was a cast of lungs, and my daughter was like, oh, it's just like a tree. Ottoline was talking earlier about branching and you know, the mathematics that underlies a lot of these biological processes is related, and that's why things often look the same when you see these peaks. So amazing. UKRI, did you have any favorite pictures from the book?
So basically from the book and the exhibit, lots of favorite. So I was actually I really liked the poems as well. Yeah, like because like a picture of health, I knew something about it also, but obviously I expected lots of paintings and sculptures, and then I was really touched by many of the poems, really. Yeah, and also the poems that were performed here. Yeah, on the previous days, on Tuesday and Wednesday, and I said to Michael Rosen, I said, you know, because in a way, poems are sort of an amalgamation of thoughts or words with emotions. Yeah, like sort of, so it's close to me as a scientist, you know, like sort of as an art form or so. So, and I was surprised that that this really stood out to me. Obviously, I also liked all the other.
Ariel, did you have any that?
I think very similar to you. I loved everything in that book, particularly because it just showed all like the diversity and the richness of like wealth of how that's one thing that, well, one of the things that we all can connect on, like health. What is health to us?
Yeah.
And I think one particular photo that stood out to me was the one with Scrub's pony.
Oh, I think we've got that. So yeah.
Yes.
Maybe you I know it's not, you're not part of it, but perhaps for anyone who's not familiar, you know, explain a little bit about the pony.
Yeah. So this is a space, and it's a space where there are ponies, and it's under the Westway. So literally where the A40. Yeah, exactly. So lots of nods. So it's under there, and it's for young people and children in the local community, where they can just basically ride on ponies and learn about, you know, nature and just, I guess, a moment of just being out of the city. Because a lot of them don't get out of the city, going back to our point earlier. And that's what stood out to me, was that in the city you can have all these incredible spaces, which teach you so much and help with your health. Yeah.
It's really great. And also it's one of these things that pony riding, again, in many, is often quite an elitist thing, because it's very expensive as a kind of private pursuit. So therefore, to be able to enable young kids, see, this is for you. If you want it, you can come and do this. You can come and take part in it. Come and look after ponies. It's fantastic. I'd like to throw the floor open to any questions. For everyone there, if you could just wait for the microphone, if that's all right.
Good timing, because it's about the scrubs, which we heard earlier in the panel about the role of nature and health. And the scrubs, I think, certainly in the thinking of Imperial and MRC, has not really featured, but it's an incredible space for, you know, recovery, but also for community events. So I was wondering how that could be developed as a place to connect the community, including Imperial and MRC, because they are bordering that space.
That's a really great question. I mean, the scrubs has changed little since I was doing my PhD here 20 plus years ago, and it is a very well used open space, but it's also a space that hasn't been developed. It's still, people would probably still shy away from walking through it in the dark, because it is pretty open and it's pretty, it's not overlooked, which is both a blessing and a curse. I keep thinking, when would Scrubs Festival? But I don't know. What do you think? Could we?
That would be an incredible idea. So next to Wormwood Scrubs is Little Wormwood Scrubs, which is just on sort of like the North Kensington side. And there's a festival there every year for the local community and for the family. So maybe we could also replicate that in the bigger Scrubs.
So the Friends of Little Scrubs.
Yes, the Friends, Little Wormwood Scrubs.
Yeah, I think maybe if you use a larger space.
Yeah.
it'd be quite effective.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
basically,
it's
take
been really
that
good.
model.
Yeah, it's been brilliant because I've been to a couple of them. It's really, really
Mhm.
good.
Fantastic. And is that something that's been generated by the local
community, and
Yeah.
we sort of contribute to it every year.
Right.
And what would be really interesting with the sort of, I want to call it the bigger scrubs because it is that it's in the middle of Old Oak, sort of North Kensington and White City. So you'll have all like these communities coming together in one big space where they can learn and, you know, bring science together.
That sounds amazing. I think, you know, because one of the difficulties of being in a building like this is by default labs can be dangerous places. We can't just have people sort of walking in and out because that would be a bit risky. But therefore, I think the onus is on us to take our science outside.
Yeah.
You know, and go outside the four walls and you know, and take our science to people. And you know, one of the things that you know that I learned a lot of doing engagement is you can't expect people to travel to you. And often the other thing is that often, you know, even if we were a more open public space, universities and organizations like that in themselves can just be daunting. There was a woman called Marilyn Hood who wrote in the 1980s about something she called the museum code, and she was one of the first people to recognize that that if you didn't get taken to art galleries or museums as a kid and told, no, you just have a look at it, read that little thing, have a think about what does it mean to you, what, you know, if you haven't been taught that, how are you supposed to know? So she called that the museum code, and a lot of what we now understand as a good public engagement practice kind of stemmed from there. But it's that, you know, it can be daunting for people to come in through a big set of doors to a higher education institution or a, you know, a university building or a research institute, if you know, because if they don't feel at home on that turf. So I think the onus is on us to go out. What do you think, Peter? Should we go out of the?
I mean, totally. Yeah, like, and that's something that Michael obviously already brought up, this the schools outreach. Yeah, and I have quite some experience with this in our from my previous institute, and that's an important thing to do. And we also did a lot of festivals, and I like the idea of the Big Scrubs Festival.
Yeah, I think we might start with something. Not started because it was started by the local community, but it would be amazing if we could see whether we wanted to share some of that with us. Any other questions? Yes. Have we got a microphone? One is fine.
I have a question to Fariel, maybe to Michael as well. Through your work with communities, is there any way that you think the scientists could interact with communities that scientists are not really aware of? That's less obvious to us.
Really good question. Michael, do you want to go first?
No.
Um,
Yeah, I would say that again, you just have to go.
Yeah.
You have to go to the people. You have to go to the people. You don't expect them to come to you. So to go to the children. So even in the summer holidays, community centres, organising things on this little, you know, space like the scrubs, space like the little scrubs, you know. So it doesn't just have to be like a formal type of stuff in schools. It's just because you're learning every day. Children are learning and growing every single day. So if you've got an opportunity in the, say in any holiday time to go, because I went to Newcastle to do a little Rusty Mouse event, and there was a scientist and a psychologist there, and he was doing all these little experiments and little exercises outside, you know, just doing simple things that it just required a bit of thought, but most people just instantly, you don't think straight away. And so it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, and I really started to get an interest in science from that. So I think if you take it to the people, you're going to create some interest.
I would totally echo that. Yeah, I would totally echo that. And I think the most important thing is not to overthink it, because once you're there with those groups, you learn so much from each other, and you realize, and you kind of learn what the challenges are, and then you're able to both offer solutions towards it and work together. And it's all around sort of collaborative co-design work, rather than feeling like it's all my responsibility and I need to be able to help them, or vice versa. And having that attitude towards, you know, science and working with the community is super important.
Fantastic. It's also something that's come out of, you know, some of my experiences has been that when scientists go along and get involved in something, but it's not just a one way, you know, I'm here to tell you stuff. It's a dialogue. The scientists come out of it going, I actually learned some stuff today as well, things I hadn't thought of, or looking at things in a different way. You know, that feedback is so important, and that's, you know, now what we consider to be sort of good engagement is when it goes both ways. It's not just one way. Any more questions? Yes, Rani.
Hi. It was a question for Michael and Farrell again. I'm sorry. One of the things that, so I've worked in this area for 30 years now, and mostly in the hospital and on this campus, yeah, with her. But one of the things that struck me during the pandemic was something I'd never expected, was that actually we'd begun to lose the trust of some of the members of the public. The kind of the brand of Imperial College was no longer welcome. And I just wonder whether that was something that either of you recognized, and whether was just a phenomenon of the pandemic. And the good news is that obviously LMS wasn't included in that, but just is that a thing? It was just kind of a sort of authority type distaste. Has that gone away now, do you think?
I think the only thing I picked up on was around the development more rather than Imperial itself, if that makes sense. So for people, it was that whole, they're taking our land, but what are they doing for us? Or what are they doing with us, most importantly? And I think it's slowly now, with all the activities that are taking place, because there's so many different researchers like we're personally working with and getting out into the community, and that visibility and building that credibility of like, we're here to work with you, we're here to share our knowledge with you, and also we understand that you're also key players in what we do has been like integral in that. But I don't think it's, I personally haven't noticed it as much.
Yeah, like myself, I haven't noticed it either specifically, no.
That's quite reassuring. I mean, obviously the name is a problem anyway, but it's just
True. Just on that, it's interesting because they were obviously with the COVID messaging became very kind of sort of polarized, sort of one way or the other. But one of the good things that came out of it, that Kevin Benson, Director of Public Health for London, was mentioned the other day, is that at the same time as, yes, there was some distrust about, you know, about the authoritarian kind of like, you must, you know, stay at home, you must mask, etc. There was also this glorious thing of people were doing scientific experiments in their kitchen. You know, who'd have thought that people would be doing ELISAs, you know, on a stick. And that it was actually very, very low friction. People wanted to do it, they enjoyed doing it. Once they kind of like figured out how to make a kit, everyone's just like, you know, every day, yeah, I'll do a test. You know, so everyone became scientists as well. So it's, you know, I think there was definitely a two-way, and I think that where there was that lack of trust, it's beginning to come back. Any final questions? Yeah, we've got two more. Duncan, and then I'll come to you.
Yeah, thanks for a great discussion. I wanted to ask a question about kind of communication of science and like building trust. Because I suppose like if I was to just like meet any random new person in real life, and they came up to me and just immediately started talking about all the fantastic things they've done, I wouldn't necessarily trust them, right? Because I don't believe anyone's that perfect. And I think most people react this way. And I think there's kind of like a similar thing in science as well. Because like, yes, we've done some like brilliant things as a scientific community, but thinking about London specifically, there was like the kind of like birth and origin of eugenics here in London. There's also, you know, boutique AI consulting firms based here in London that consult for foreign countries so they can suppress civil liberties. And so if you think, well, the AI and data science experts in this room, you know, these companies are going to want to try and hire these people. So, you know, we need to kind of be aware that we're kind of part of that ecosystem as well. So how do we kind of integrate both these positive and negative messages in our scientific communication to kind of help build trust?
Steve, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think it's important to see all these aspects and to be honest and to have a dialogue. Yeah, and to give each other feedback at all levels. Yeah, I think that's these are important elements of communication.
It's interesting that the conversation it's come full circle. We started with communication, but also, you know, it's one thing that underpins everything that we're talking about, from building new buildings to creating new science,
Understanding each other's languages.
Understanding each other's languages, to everything. One final question. Do you have a microphone there?
And Faisy, perhaps we could end on an amusing note.
Yeah.
Scrubs and the comments bring to my mind a story, a real story, a professor at the Hammersmith who had married recently a lady not from the UK, from outside, and had seen the scrubs and everything. And one evening they were invited to dinner at one of the Cambridge universities. And she was so impressed with the lawns, you know, the colleges and everything. And at dinner, she said, "So you have scrubs too?" and this was at a high table. Can you imagine?
That's fantastic. That's my favorite story. And a perfect note on which to end. So I'd just like to thank all my panelists very, very much. Thank you. Now, before you all go, there is some fizz outside. I would love it if you were able to stop and join in and just a celebratory drink before you go. But just before we go to that, I do have some thanks for some people without whom none of this would have been possible. I'd like to say thank you to my team, Sophia, Esther, and Isabella, who've been absolutely fantastic. And to Patrick, who has been on the technical front. Behind the scenes, I want to thank Eugene, our head of estates. I want to thank Simon. I want to thank Jamie and the LMS procurement team who have ordered the most weird and wonderful things in super quick time, sort of going above and beyond and like skipping all the steps we're normally supposed to do. To try and make things happen because we had quite a short lead time on this. So they've been amazing. And then you know, none of this would be here. Well, first of all, thank you to all the LMS staff as well, because you have been incredibly patient, you've been incredibly kind, and you have not complained about the fact that we've taken over your spaces and got in the way and disrupted things generally. So thank you, all of you, for being patient and also coming along. But then finally, I just want to say none of this could have happened without the Picture of Health team. That is Andre Molyneux, Kiki von Glazo, and Lindsay Goff. And we have some things that we would like to give to them to say thank you very much. Have we got Lindsay here? Kiki and Andre. These are not for you. This is for you. Oh my gosh.
Can I just say a quick thing? Lindsay Keith, you know, as you've met her, she has done so much work to make this event possible. I sit opposite her and I cannot explain to you the last couple of months. She has just been picture of health, and she's done an amazing job. And last 4 days, she came on a Sunday last weekend. She just like above and beyond. And yeah, a huge round of applause. Thank you.
Very unexpected. However, lastly, but very, very, very much not leastly, we would like to thank Mandy Fisher, the Professor Mandy Fisher. Mandy! Thank you. Mandy has been an absolute pillar of engagement for this place. Picture of Health would not have happened if it weren't for her. We are incredibly grateful and we will miss her.
Oh, really?
We wish you all the best of luck in Oxford. I want to say thank you very much. Thank you, Mandy. Finally, one other person who's underpinned so much work in all of this is Alessandra. Where are you, Alessandra? Missing in action. Alessandra is the executive assistant to director, so she has been working side by side with Mandy for many, many years, and now will be working side by side with Vipka. But she's been invaluable in bringing all of this together. And I think we can.
She goes just hiding a lot.
About it, yes. Yes. So I think that draws to a close proceedings. Thank you again for coming. It's been absolutely fantastic. Please join us in a glass of fizz outside and have a lovely evening. Thank you.
Fantastic. Nice one. Fantastic.
Thank you.
So glad to be invited. It's fabulous.
Well done.
Fabulous.
Thank you. Thank you.
It was lovely. I really enjoyed it.
Nice one.